The rising sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail as Deanna Marshall gripped the reins of her weary team, the creak of her wagon wheels providing the only accompaniment to her solitary journey west. At 22, with nothing but determination and her parents' old wagon filled with her meager belongings, she was heading to Wyoming Territory to claim the land her late uncle had left her last chance at a new beginning after losing everything in the Kansas drought of 1876. The water of the Snake River glittered in the morning light, deceptively peaceful. Deanna had been traveling for weeks, her fair skin now bronzed by the relentless sun, her honey-blonde hair tied back with a faded ribbon. The crossing point ahead seemed shallow enough, though the current moved swiftly. She had no choice but to forge ahead. The nearest bridge was a 2-day detour she couldn't afford to make. "Come on now," she urged her horses, clicking her tongue as she guided them toward the water's edge. The wagon lurched forward, wheels sinking into the muddy bank before finding purchase on the river stones beneath. The horses strained against their harnesses, water splashing up around their legs as they pulled the heavy wagon deeper into the current. Deanna was halfway across when she heard a sickening crack that sent a jolt through the entire wagon. The right rear wheel had struck a submerged boulder, splintering the aged wood. The wagon tilted dangerously, water beginning to seep into the bed where all her worldly possessions were stored. "No, no," Deanna cried, panic rising in her chest as she tried to urge the horses forward. But the broken wheel had lodged between rocks, and the current pushed against the wagon's side with growing force. She was stranded in the middle of the river, her future quite literally washing away before her eyes. A low whistle caught her attention, and Deanna turned to see a rider approaching the river's edge. He sat tall in his saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Without hesitation, the stranger spurred his horse into the water, the powerful animal cutting through the current with practiced ease. "Looks like you could use a hand, madam," the man called as he drew closer, his voice carrying over the rush of the water. Deanna watched as he dismounted in the knee-deep water, securing his horse to the wagon before waiting around to inspect the damage. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. "The wheel's completely gone," he announced, pushing his hat back to reveal dark hair with a touch of auburn when it caught the sunlight. "Name's Preston Evans, madam. If you don't mind, I'll take it from here." Deanna nodded, relief and wariness battling within her. In the wild territories, trust came at a premium, but she had little choice. "Deanna Marshall, I would be most grateful for your assistance, Mr. Evans." Preston wasted no time. He unhitched Diana's tired horses and secured them to his own mount before retrieving rope from his saddlebags. With remarkable efficiency, he managed to fashion a makeshift sling for the broken axle, keeping the wagon from tipping further. "We need to get your belongings to shore before we lose them," he said, already climbing into the wagon bed. "Pass me what you can." Together they worked quickly, Deanna's skirts heavy with water as she ferried bundles and boxes to the safety of the riverbank. Preston handled the heavier items, her mother's cast iron cookware, her father's old rifle, a small chest containing her few valuables. The sun climbed higher as they labored, but neither complained. With the wagon lightened, Preston led Deanna's horses back to shore, then returned with his own to help drag the damaged wagon from the river's grip. The task required all their combined strength and ingenuity, but eventually the broken vehicle sat dripping on the western bank. Deanna pushed strands of wet hair from her face, surveying the scene. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Evans. You've saved everything I own." Preston knelt by the damaged wheel, examining the splintered wood and bent iron rim. "This wheel isn't going anywhere, Miss Marshall. Nearest town with a proper wheelwright is Riverton, about 15 miles west. He straightened, brushing mud from his hands. What brings a lady like yourself to these parts alone? Deanna hesitated, years of caution making her careful with strangers. I'm traveling to a piece of land near Jackson. My uncle left it to me when he passed. She didn't mention that she'd never met this uncle, or that the land was her last hope. Preston nodded, his expression thoughtful. Jackson's still a fair piece from here, nearly 100 miles of rough country. He glanced at the sky, noting the position of the sun. I'm headed toward Riverton myself. I could help you get this wagon there for repairs. Diana studied him, noting the honest set of his jaw and the calluses on his hands, a working man, not some drifter looking for easy prey. Still, her mother's warnings echoed in her mind. The West was no place for a woman alone. I appreciate the offer, but I wouldn't want to delay your journey, she said carefully. A smile touched the corner of Preston's mouth. No delay at all, Miss Marshall. I was planning to stop in Riverton anyway. He gestured to the broken wheel. Besides, you won't get far without help. Deanna knew he was right. Her father had taught her many things: how to shoot, how to manage accounts, how to care for horses, but repairing wagon wheels wasn't among them. Very well, Mr. Evans. I accept your assistance and I insist on paying you for your trouble. Preston shook his head. No need for payment. My pa raised me to help folks in need. He looked around, assessing their situation. We'll need to rig a temporary fix to get the wagon moving. I've got some tools on my horse. With your permission, I'll get started. For the next hour, Deanna watched as Preston worked with skilled efficiency, using a fallen log to create a crude skid that would allow the wagon to be dragged. He reinforced it with metal strapping from his saddlebags and secured it with rope. It won't be a smooth ride, he warned, but it should hold until we reach town. As Preston hitched his horse alongside Deanna's team, she offered him water from her canteen. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Diana felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the midday sun. May I ask what business you have in Riverton, Mr. Evans? She inquired, attempting to assess whether her rescuer was trustworthy. Preston took a long drink before answering. I run cattle on a spread about 20 miles north of there. Been to Cheyenne delivering a herd to the railroad. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. 3 months on the trail, and I'm looking forward to sleeping in a real bed again. There was something reassuring about the way he said it, matter of fact, without embellishment. Diana had met enough men trying to impress her with tall tales to appreciate straightforward honesty. They set off with Preston leading the horses and Diana walking alongside, her boots still squelching with river water. The makeshift repair meant the wagon lurched and scraped along, but it moved steadily forward. You said you're claiming land near Jackson? Preston asked after they'd traveled in companionable silence for a while. That's prime country. Good water, decent grazing. Your uncle must have been an early settler. I believe he was, Deanna replied, though truthfully she knew little about Marcus Marshall. He was my father's brother. They lost touch years ago, and I only learned of the inheritance after my parents passed last year. Preston's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Marshall. Thank you. Deanna fixed her eyes on the horizon, unwilling to reveal how deep that loss cut. The drought had taken their crops, illness had taken her parents, and creditors had taken their Kansas farm. This journey west represented her only chance to avoid the fate of so many women left destitute, a loveless marriage of convenience or work in establishments of questionable repute. It's not easy starting fresh in these territories, Preston remarked, as if reading her thoughts. But there's opportunity here for those willing to work hard. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Evans, Deanna said with quiet determination. My father made sure of that. Preston smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weather-worn face. I believe you, Miss Marshall. They continued their journey as the afternoon waned, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and adjust the makeshift skid. Deanna found herself studying Preston when he wasn't looking the confident set of his shoulders, the gentle way he handled the animals, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he found joy despite the harsh realities of frontier life. By the time the sun was low in the sky, they had made good progress, but Riverton was still several hours away. We should make camp, Preston suggested, gesturing to a stand of cottonwoods near a small creek. Get an early start tomorrow. Deanna nodded her agreement, though the prospect of camping alongside a man she just met caused her some trepidation. As if sensing her concern, Preston added, I'll set up by those trees over there, give you your privacy. They worked together to establish camp, with Preston handling the horses while Deanna gathered wood for a fire. Her father's teachings proved valuable as she quickly had a small blaze going. From her salvaged provisions, she produced dried meat, hardtack, and coffee, simple fare, but welcome after their labors. This is mighty fine coffee, Miss Marshall, Preston commented as they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. My mother's special blend, Deanna replied, feeling a pang of sadness at the memory. She insisted good coffee was essential, especially when everything else was hard. Preston nodded in understanding. My mother felt the same way. She passed when I was 15, but I remember how she'd trade with travelers for coffee beans, saying civilized living required at least one luxury. The unexpected sharing of this personal detail made Deanna look at him with new interest. You grew up out here then? Born in Missouri, came west with my folks when I was 10, Preston replied. My father had dreams of ranching in the new territories. We settled north of here, worked the land together until he passed 5 years ago. He paused, turning his cup in his hands. It hasn't been easy, but the Diamond E is starting to thrive now. Diamond E your ranch? Deanna asked. Preston nodded. Evans' family brand. Started with just 20 head of longhorns and a run-down cabin. Now we've got close to 500 cattle and proper buildings. There was justifiable pride in his voice, but no boasting. Deanna couldn't help asking, wondering if there was a Mrs. Evans waiting at home. Me and a few hired hands, Preston clarified, his eyes meeting hers briefly across the flames. No family of my own yet. The right opportunity hasn't presented itself. There was something in the way he said it that made Diana's cheeks warm, and she busied herself with pouring more coffee. As night fell fully, the sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the gentle lapping of the creek. Deanna found herself less frightened than she might have expected, Preston's steady presence somehow reassuring. I'll take first watch, he offered, settling his back against a log. You get some rest, Miss Marshall. Tomorrow will be another long day. Deanna nodded gratefully, retiring to her wagon where she had arranged her bedroll. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her initially as her mind replayed the day's events, the terror of the broken wheel, the unexpected appearance of Preston Evans, the strange sense of comfort she felt in his company, despite knowing him for less than a day. Eventually, the rhythmic sounds of the night lulled her to sleep, and when she woke, dawn was breaking. She found Preston already tending to the horses, a fresh pot of coffee brewing over the rekindled fire. Good morning, Miss Marshall, he greeted her, tipping his hat. Hope you slept well. Better than I expected, Deanna admitted, accepting the cup he offered. And please call me Deanna. It seems silly to stand on formality after you've rescued me from the river." A smile tugged at Preston's mouth. "Deanna," he repeated as if testing the name. "Then I insist you call me Preston." They broke camp efficiently and resumed their journey as the morning mist still clung to the ground. The makeshift repair continued to hold, though the wagon's progress remained slow and laborious. Deanna insisted on walking alongside rather than riding, unwilling to add her weight to the already strained vehicle. As they traveled, Preston pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area, revealing an intimate knowledge of the territory that both impressed and reassured Deanna. He spoke of the local tribes with respect, noted which settlers were friendly and which best avoided, and identified places where water could be found in the driest months. "You seem to know everyone and everything in these parts," Deanna observed as they stopped to rest the horses around midday. Preston shrugged modestly. "Cattle business takes me all over. You learn quickly that good relations and knowledge of the land mean the difference between success and failure out here." Deanna thought about the land waiting for her near Jackson, 80 acres of unknown territory that she would somehow have to tame alone. The task had seemed manageable when she set out from Kansas, but the broken wheel had shaken her confidence. "I must seem foolish to you," she said suddenly, "a woman on her own thinking she can establish a homestead." Preston looked at her with surprise. "Not at all. It takes courage to do what you're doing, Deanna. The West was built by people willing to take risks." His words bolstered her spirits, and they continued their journey with renewed purpose. By late afternoon, buildings appeared on the horizon. Riverton, a small but growing settlement that served the surrounding ranches and the steady stream of pioneers heading further west. As they approached the town, Deanna became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her travel-worn dress, her hair hastily pinned up that morning, the mud still clinging to her boots. What would the townsfolk think of her arriving in such a state, accompanied by a man she barely knew? Preston seemed to sense her discomfort. "Mrs. Thornton runs a respectable boarding house just off the main street," he said. "She's a kind woman who doesn't indulge in gossip. You'll be comfortable there while the wagon's being repaired." Deanna nodded gratefully. "And you? Where will you stay?" "I usually bunk at the Golden Spur when I'm in town," Preston replied, naming what Deanna presumed was the local saloon. Seeing her expression, he added with a smile, "They have decent rooms upstairs for travelers. Nothing fancy, but clean enough." They entered Riverton just as the church bell was striking 5 o'clock. The main street bustled with activity, merchants closing shops, cowboys heading to the saloon for evening drinks, women gathering at the general store to exchange news. Deanna felt the curious stares as Preston led their unusual procession toward the blacksmith shop at the end of the street. The blacksmith, a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks, emerged from his shop at their approach. "Preston Evans, didn't expect to see you back so soon." His gaze shifted to Deanna and the damaged wagon. "Looks like you found trouble on the trail." "This is Miss Deanna Marshall," Preston introduced her with a respectful tip of his hat. "She had a mishap crossing the Snake. Wheels completely gone, Sam. Can you help us out?" Sam circled the wagon, examining the damage with a professional eye. "Wheel I can make, but the axle's bent too. Gonna take a few days to fix proper." He looked at Deanna. "No shortcuts when it comes to wagon repairs, madam, not if you're heading into mountain country." "I understand," Deanna said, though her heart sank at the delay. Her funds were limited, and even a few days in town would strain her budget. Preston stepped in smoothly. "Miss Marshall needs safe passage to Jackson. Whatever it costs to make this wagon sound, I'll cover it." "Preston, no," Deanna protested immediately. "You've already done more than enough. "I can't accept, consider it a loan," Preston interrupted gently. "You can repay me once you're settled on your land." Before Deanna could argue further, Sam spoke up. "I can start on it first thing tomorrow. Should be ready by week's end if all goes well." He named a price that made Diana wince inwardly, though she kept her expression neutral. With the arrangements made, Preston escorted Diana to Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, a neat two-story building with lace curtains and flower boxes that stood in stark contrast to the rugged functionality of the rest of the town. Mrs. Thornton herself answered their knock, a plump, gray-haired woman whose sharp eyes took in every detail of Diana's appearance and Preston's protective stance beside her. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Miss Deanna Marshall," Preston said. "She's had some trouble with her wagon and needs lodging while repairs are made. I can vouch for her character." The older woman's expression softened. "Any friend of Preston Evans is welcome here. Come in, dear. You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal." Deanna turned to Preston, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had become her protector. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along when you did." Preston smiled, his blue eyes warm. "Just glad I was there to help. I'll check on the wagon tomorrow and let you know how the repairs are progressing." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you'll join me for supper tomorrow evening. The hotel dining room serves a fine meal." Deanna found herself agreeing before she had time to consider the propriety of the invitation. There was something about Preston Evans that inspired trust, despite the cautions her mother had instilled about frontier men. That night, after the luxury of a hot bath and wearing a clean dress from her salvaged belongings, Deanna sat in her small but comfortable room and penned an entry in her journal. She described the dramatic events of the day, her fears when the wheel broke, and her unexpected rescue by the cattleman. Almost against her will, she found herself dwelling on Preston's kindness, his quiet competence, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Deanna closed her journal with a shake of her head, chiding herself for such thoughts. She had come west to claim her independence, not to become distracted by a handsome cowboy, no matter how honorable he seemed. The next morning, Deanna awoke to the sounds of the town coming to life, wagons rolling down the main street, merchants opening their shops, the blacksmith's hammer already ringing from his forge. After a hearty breakfast with Mrs. Thornton and her other boarders, a schoolteacher, and an elderly couple waiting for a stage to California, Deanna set out to explore Riverton. The town was larger than it had appeared the previous evening, with a main street boasting a general store, bank, land office, hotel, 2 saloons, and various other establishments catering to the needs of local ranchers and travelers. Deanna visited the general store first, taking inventory of supplies she would need for the remainder of her journey and for establishing her homestead. As she examined bolts of sturdy fabric, mentally calculating what she could afford, a female voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must be Miss Marshall. Preston mentioned you'd be in town." Deanna turned to find a woman about her own age, fashionably dressed in a blue walking suit that complemented her dark hair and eyes. She extended a gloved hand with a friendly smile. "I'm Eliza Thornton, Mrs. Thornton's daughter-in-law. Preston stopped by the bank this morning. My husband Daniel is the manager and mentioned he'd be escorting you to dinner this evening." Diana shook the offered hand, noting the genuine warmth in Eliza's expression. "Yes, Mr. Evans has been very kind after my mishap at the river crossing. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Thornton." "Please call me Eliza," the woman insisted. "Riverton doesn't stand much on ceremony, and besides, any friend of Preston's is a friend of mine. He's practically family." Deanna felt an unexpected twinge at these words. "You've known him long then?" Eliza nodded, moving to examine the fabrics alongside Deanna. "Since we were children. His ranch neighbors my father's property north of town. Preston was best man at my wedding 3 years ago." She selected a bolt of blue calico. "This would suit you beautifully, with your coloring." Diana admired the fabric but reluctantly set it aside for a more practical brown. "I'm establishing a homestead near Jackson. Pretty things will have to wait until I'm settled." A look of respect crossed Eliza's face. "Homesteading alone, that takes courage." She lowered her voice slightly. "Though if you don't mind my saying so, I suspect you won't be alone for long, not with the way Preston was talking about you." Heat rose to Diana's cheeks. "I'm sure you're mistaken. Mr. Evans is simply being kind to a traveler in distress." Eliza laughed softly. "Preston Evans is always kind, but I've never seen him offer to sponsor a stranger's wagon repairs or arrange dinner at Hayward's before." She picked up the blue calico again. "Let me get this for you. Consider it a welcome gift." Before Deanna could protest, Eliza had carried the fabric to the counter and was instructing the storekeeper to add it to her account. Deanna found herself both touched by the gesture and unsettled by Eliza's implications about Preston's interest. Later that afternoon, as Deanna was returning to the boarding house to prepare for dinner, she spotted Preston emerging from the blacksmith shop. Even from a distance, she could appreciate his tall figure and the confident way he carried himself. He was dressed more formally than the previous day, in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his usual hat replaced by a newer one. He saw her at the same moment, his face brightening as he crossed the street to meet her. "Diana, I was just coming to find you." He gestured toward the blacksmith's. "Sam says the wagon should be ready by Saturday morning. He's crafting an entirely new wheel and straightening the axle." "That's wonderful news," Deanna replied, suddenly conscious of her wind-blown hair and dusty skirts. "I should be able to continue my journey without further delay." A fleeting expression crossed Preston's face disappointment. "Yes, I suppose you're eager to reach your property before winter sets in." He offered his arm. "May I walk you back to Mrs. Thornton's? I'll return at 7 to escort you to dinner if that's still agreeable." Deanna placed her hand on his arm, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "Yes, thank you. I look forward to it." As they walked, Preston asked about her day, listening with genuine interest as she described her explorations of the town. "I met Eliza Thornton at the general store," Deanna added. "She mentioned your old friends." Preston nodded, a fond smile touching his lips. "The Thorntons have been neighbors and friends since my family first settled here. Daniel and I grew up together, though he was always more suited to books and business than ranching. He's made the bank thrive, which has been good for the whole community." "Eliza said your ranch borders her father's property?" "That's right. The Diamond E shares its northern boundary with the Circle T. Judge Thomas Eliza's father was one of the first to establish a successful ranch in these parts. Taught my father a lot about cattle raising in this territory." Preston guided her around a muddy patch in the street with a gentle hand at her elbow. "The judge is getting on in years now. His son-in-law helps manage the ranch alongside his bank duties." They reached the boarding house steps, and Deanna reluctantly withdrew her hand from his arm. "Thank you for the escort, Preston. I'll be ready at 7. He tipped his hat, a smile warming his blue eyes. "Until then, Deanna." Inside, Mrs. Thornton was waiting with knowing eyes and an offer to press Deanna's best dress for the evening. "Preston Evans doesn't escort just anyone to Hayward's," she remarked as she took the garment, a simple but elegant navy blue dress that had belonged to Deanna's mother. That boy's been focused on nothing but that ranch of his since his father died. It's good to see him taking an interest in something else for a change." Deanna felt her cheeks warm. "You're reading too much into a simple dinner invitation, Mrs. Thornton. Mr. Evans is merely being hospitable to a traveler." The older woman made a non-committal sound as she inspected the dress. "This will look lovely with your coloring, dear. And if I were you, I'd wear your hair down tonight. Men appreciate such things, though they rarely say so." Despite her protests about Mrs. Thornton's matchmaking, Diana found herself taking extra care with her appearance that evening. She washed her hair and left it loose as suggested, the honey blonde waves falling past her shoulders. The navy dress, though several years old, fit well and complemented her sun-kissed skin. Her mother's cameo at her throat was her only adornment. Preston arrived precisely at 7, and the appreciation in his eyes when Mrs. Thornton showed him into the parlor where Deanna waited sent a flutter through her chest. He was even more handsome cleaned up, his auburn-tinged hair neatly combed, his tall frame set off by a well-tailored dark suit that must have been specially ordered from back east. "You look beautiful, Deanna," he said simply, offering his arm once more. The walk to Hayward's hotel was brief but memorable, with Preston pointing out buildings of interest and greeting townsfolk by name as they passed. Many looked at Deanna with undisguised curiosity, and she realized that her appearance on Preston's arm was likely causing quite a stir in the small community. Hayward's dining room proved to be surprisingly elegant, with white tablecloths, silver place settings, and a small vase of wildflowers adorning each table. The proprietor himself showed them to a quiet corner, addressing Preston with the deference due to an important customer. "Mr. Hayward imports most of his kitchen supplies and some foodstuffs directly from Denver," Preston explained after they were seated. "It makes his establishment the finest dining option between Cheyenne and Idaho." Deanna glanced around, noting that several of the diners were looking their way with interest. "I feel rather conspicuous," she admitted. "I suspect we're providing the town with fresh gossip." Preston smiled, his eyes never leaving her face. "Small towns run on gossip, I'm afraid. But don't worry, Riverton's residents are generally kind in their judgments." He unfolded his napkin. "Besides, I find I don't mind being seen with the most beautiful woman to pass through these parts in years." The compliment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, caught Deanna off guard, and she busied herself with her own napkin to hide her pleased confusion. No one had called her beautiful since, before her parents fell ill, and the hard work of trying to save the farm had taken its toll on her appearance. Their dinner was indeed excellent, with tender roast beef, vegetables that tasted fresher than Deanna would have expected in a frontier town, and a bottle of surprisingly good wine that Preston ordered. As they ate, Preston asked about Deanna's life in Kansas, listening with genuine interest as she shared stories of her childhood on the farm. "My parents believed in education," she told him. "My father built a small library in our home, ordering books whenever possible. My mother taught me not just household skills but mathematics and history." Deanna smiled at the memory. "They wanted me to have choices beyond what most women are offered." "They sound like remarkable people," Preston commented. "You must miss them terribly." Deanna nodded, the familiar ache of loss surfacing briefly. "Every day. But they raised me to be self-reliant, and I intend to honor their memory by making this new start work." "And what exactly are your plans for your uncle's land?" Preston asked, refilling her wine glass. 80 acres is a good start, but it's a challenging proposition for anyone alone, let alone," he stopped himself, "let alone a woman." Deanna finished with a raised eyebrow, though there was no real offense in her tone. She had heard similar concerns many times during her journey. I plan to start modestly. A garden for my own needs, perhaps some chickens and a milk cow. Once I'm established, I thought to try my hand at raising sheep. The mountains near Jackson should provide good grazing and wool always fetches a fair price. Preston looked impressed. You've given this serious thought. I've had little else to do during weeks on the trail, Deanna admitted. Though I confess, yesterday's accident made me question whether I'm being foolhardy rather than brave. Preston's hand moved across the table to cover hers briefly. There's a fine line between courage and foolishness out here, Deanna. But from what I've seen, you fall firmly on the side of courage. The warmth of his hand and his words stayed with Deanna long after he withdrew his touch. They finished their meal with apple pie and coffee, the conversation flowing easily between them. Preston spoke of his plans for the Diamond E, his hope to improve his stock by breeding Texas Longhorns with Herefords for better beef and hardiness, his dream of expanding the original homestead into a proper ranch house now that the operation was profitable. It sounds as though you've built something remarkable, Deanna said admiringly. It's a good start, Preston agreed, but a ranch is a lonely place without family to share it. There was something in his voice that made Deanna look up sharply, meeting his intent gaze, the walk back to Mrs. Thornton's boarding house seemed both too short and too long to Deanna, her emotions in a confused tumult. Preston kept a respectful distance, though he occasionally guided her with a light touch at her elbow. The night air was cool, stars bright in the vast Wyoming sky above them. At the boarding house steps, Preston paused. I enjoyed this evening very much, Deanna. Would you allow me to show you more of the area tomorrow? There's a lovely spot by Thompson Creek, just a short ride from town. We could take a picnic lunch. The invitation was tempting, too tempting. Deanna found herself thinking of Eliza's comments and Mrs. Thornton's matchmaking assumptions. Preston Evans was handsome, kind, established, and clearly interested in her. It would be easy to let herself be charmed, to begin imagining a different future than the solitary one she had planned. But she had come west to claim her independence, not to fall into marriage with the first suitable man she encountered, no matter how attractive the prospect. And there was the practical matter of her land near Jackson, 100 miles from Preston's ranch. Thank you for the invitation, Preston, but I should use tomorrow to prepare for the rest of my journey, she said, trying to ignore the disappointment that flashed across his face. I need to purchase supplies and make sure everything is in order once the wagon is repaired. Preston nodded, accepting her decision with grace. Of course, perhaps I could assist with your preparations. I know which supplies will serve you best for the mountain journey. That would be very kind, Deanna conceded, unwilling to refuse his help when it was so practically offered. He took her hand then, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Good night, Deanna. Sleep well. Before releasing her hand, he bent slightly and brushed his lips across her knuckles in a gesture that sent an unexpected shiver up her spine. Good night, Preston, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Thornton was waiting up, ostensibly reading in the parlor but clearly eager for details of the evening. Deanna provided only the barest outline before pleading fatigue and retreating to her room. Alone, she stood at the window looking out at the starlit street, her thoughts in turmoil. Preston Evans represented everything a sensible woman seeking security on the frontier should want. He was established, respected, and genuinely kind. The attraction she felt toward him was undeniable, and she sensed it was mutual. But accepting his interest meant potentially abandoning her plans for independence, the very reason she had undertaken this perilous journey. The next morning brought no clarity. Deanna busied herself with practical matters, visiting the general store to purchase supplies she would need for her homestead: seeds for planting, basic tools, preserved foods to tide her over until she could grow her own. The storekeeper proved knowledgeable about what pioneers in the Jackson area typically required, and Deanna was grateful for his guidance. She was examining axes when the store's bell jingled and Preston entered, looking as if he'd already put in a full morning's work. His eyes found her immediately, a smile lighting his features. "Good morning, Deanna. I see you've started your shopping without me." Deanna returned his smile despite her conflicted feelings. "I didn't want to impose on your time, Preston. I'm sure you have business of your own in town." "Nothing that can't wait," he assured her, coming to stand beside her. "Though I was hoping to catch you before you spent too much. Some of these items might be available at better prices in Jackson, while others you won't find there at all." With Preston's expert guidance, Deanna adjusted her purchases, saving precious dollars on some items and investing wisely in others that would be harder to obtain in the more remote settlement. His knowledge of territory economics impressed her, as did his respectful manner. Not once did he suggest her plans were impractical or beyond her capabilities, unlike many men she'd encountered on her journey. As they worked together, Deanna found herself telling Preston more about her dreams for the land, not just subsistence farming and sheep raising, but perhaps eventually a small orchard and beehives for honey. Preston listened attentively, occasionally offering practical suggestions that demonstrated his understanding of the region's climate and conditions. "You've given this a great deal of thought," he remarked as they finished arranging for delivery of the larger items to the blacksmith shop, where her wagon was being repaired. "Most settlers arrive with vague notions of farming whatever they grew back east, without considering the different conditions here. My father believed in research and preparation," Deanna explained as they stepped out onto the boardwalk. "Before he became ill, he subscribed to agricultural journals and corresponded with farmers in different territories. I learned from him that knowledge is as important as hard work." Preston nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. Too many fail out here because they're unprepared for the realities." He hesitated, then added, "I still have those journals at the ranch. They might be useful to you in your endeavors." The offer was clearly genuine and made without any attempt to dissuade her from her plans. Deanna felt her guard lowering slightly. "Thank you. I would value such information." They continued down the street, stopping at various establishments to complete Deanna's preparations. At the land office, Preston introduced her to the clerk, who provided maps of the area around Jackson and information about neighboring properties. At the bank, Daniel Thornton welcomed her warmly, clearly already aware of her connection to Preston, and offered advice about establishing credit in her new community. By midday, Deanna's essential business was complete, and Preston suggested lunch at a small cafe run by a Chinese family at the edge of town. "Best food in Riverton, though many folks won't try it because it's unfamiliar," he explained as he held the door for her. The tiny restaurant was immaculately clean, with simple wooden tables and delicious aromas filling the air. The proprietor greeted Preston by name and led them to a corner table, bringing tea in small cups without handles. "Mr. Wung and his family came to Wyoming to work on the railroad," Preston explained after they had ordered from a menu he helped Deanna interpret. "When the line was completed, they stayed to open this establishment. They've faced considerable prejudice, but they've persevered and built a good business." Deanna was struck by the respect in Preston's voice. "You admire them." "I do," he confirmed. It takes courage to make a place for yourself where others don't believe you belong. His eyes met hers. Something you understand, I think. The parallel was clear, and Deanna felt a surge of warmth toward him. Yes, I suppose I do. Their meal arrived: fragrant rice, tender beef with vegetables in a flavorful sauce, and dumplings filled with pork and herbs. Deanna found the food delicious, though entirely different from anything she had tasted before. The world is changing, Preston remarked as they ate. The railroad brings people, goods, and ideas from every corner. Those who can adapt will thrive. He smiled slightly. My father would hardly recognize the territory now, just 5 years after his passing. You think he would approve of the changes? Deanna asked. Preston considered this. Some yes, others perhaps not, but he understood that standing still means being left behind. He set down his chopsticks, which he had been using with practiced ease. That's part of why I'm introducing Herefords to my herd. The future of ranching will belong to those willing to improve their stock, not just those who claim the most land. As they finished their meal, Wang's wife brought a small plate of sweet rice cakes, refusing payment with a shy smile. For Mr. Preston and his lady, she said in accented English before retreating to the kitchen. Diana felt her cheeks warm at the assumption but didn't correct the woman. Preston merely thanked her politely, though Deanna caught the pleased look in his eyes. After lunch, they walked toward the blacksmith shop to check on the progress of the wagon repairs. The main street was busy with afternoon activity: freight wagons unloading at the mercantile, cowboys lounging outside the saloon, women gossiping on the boardwalk in front of the milliner's shop. Several people called greetings to Preston, their curious gazes taking in Deanna at his side. I believe we've become the main topic of conversation in Riverton, Deanna observed with a mixture of amusement and discomfort. Preston chuckled. Small town life. Everyone knows everyone's business or thinks they should. His expression grew more serious. Does it bother you, the speculation? Deanna considered the question. Not for my sake. I'll be moving on soon enough, but you live here, have business relationships and friendships to maintain. Are you concerned for my reputation, Deanna? There was a teasing note in his voice, but genuine curiosity too. Perhaps I'm concerned about expectations, she replied carefully. People see us together and draw conclusions. Natural conclusions, I suppose. They had reached the blacksmith shop, but Preston stopped before entering, turning to face her directly. What conclusions have you drawn, Deanna? The directness of the question caught her off guard. I am not sure what you mean. I think you are. His blue eyes held her steadily. I've enjoyed these days with you more than any I can recall in recent memory. I find myself thinking of ways to delay your departure, reasons to persuade you to stay. He took a breath. But I also respect your independence and the dreams you've shared with me, so I'm asking, where do you see this leading? The honesty of his question deserved an equally honest answer, difficult as it was to formulate. I don't know, Preston, Deanna admitted. I came west with a clear plan: claim my land, build a life of my own making. I wasn't looking for. She gestured between them, unable to put into words the connection that had formed so quickly. Nor was I, Preston said softly. I've been focused on the ranch, on fulfilling my father's vision and my own. But plans change, Deanna, sometimes for the better. Before Deanna could respond, the blacksmith emerged from his shop, wiping his hands on a rag. Mr. Evans, Miss Marshall. Just the folks I wanted to see. That wagon's coming along nicely, should be ready by tomorrow afternoon, barring any unforeseen issues. The moment broken, Deanna and Preston turned their attention to Sam's detailed explanation of the repairs, asking questions and expressing appreciation for his craftsmanship. But Diana could feel the weight of their unfinished conversation, the questions that remained unanswered between them. As they left the blacksmith's, Preston suggested a walk along the river that ran behind the town, a chance to escape the curious eyes of Riverton's residents. Diana agreed, feeling they both needed space to think. The riverside path was peaceful, with cottonwoods providing dappled shade and the gentle sound of flowing water creating a natural music. They walked in companionable silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. "My land near Jackson," Diana finally said, breaking the quiet. "It's been in my family for nearly 20 years, according to the deed. My uncle believed in its potential enough to hold onto it all this time, even though he never developed it himself." Preston nodded, understanding her unspoken point. "And you feel obligated to honor that belief to see what might come of it?" "Yes," Diana confirmed, grateful for his perception. "It's not just land to me, it's a legacy, perhaps the only one my family will ever leave." She looked up at him. "Can you understand that?" "Better than most," Preston replied. "The Diamond E is my family's legacy too. Everything my father worked for, everything I've built upon his foundation." He paused, then added carefully, "But legacies can take different forms, Diana. They don't have to be bound to a specific piece of land." They had reached a bend in the river where a fallen log created a natural bench. Preston gestured to it and they sat, watching the water flow past. "What if there was a way to honor both legacies?" Preston asked after a moment. "Your uncle's land and my ranch." Diana looked at him questioningly. "I don't see how that's possible. They're 100 miles apart." Preston turned to face her, his expression earnest. "Property can be sold, Diana, or kept as an investment. New land can be purchased." He took her hand gently in his. "I know we've known each other only days, but I feel—" He stopped, seemingly searching for words. "I feel as if I've been waiting for you without knowing it." Diana's heart beat faster, both thrilled and frightened by the direction of his words. "Preston, let me finish, please," he requested softly. "I'm not asking for any promises today, only that you consider postponing your departure, staying in Riverton a little longer. Give us time to discover if what I feel, what I hope we both feel, is real and lasting." The proposal was unexpected yet not entirely surprising. In the few days they had known each other, a connection had formed that Diana couldn't deny. But was it enough to change the course she had set for herself? "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Preston nodded, squeezing her hand before releasing it. "Of course, I wouldn't expect otherwise." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up from the log. "Would tomorrow morning be enough time? We could ride out to Thompson Creek as I suggested earlier. Its beautiful country might help clear your thoughts." Diana accepted his help, her hand lingering in his a moment longer than necessary. "Yes, I'd like that." They walked back toward town as the afternoon waned, talking of lighter matters. Preston's favorite horse, a stubborn buckskin gelding named Rusty. Diana's childhood desire to become a schoolteacher before practical necessities turned her toward farming. Shared memories of books they had both read and enjoyed. At the boarding house steps, Preston bid her good night with a respectful tip of his hat and a promise to collect her at 9 the next morning for their ride. Diana watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset, before going inside to face Mrs. Thornton's inevitable questions. Alone in her room that night, Diana sat at the small writing desk and opened her journal. Instead of recording the day's events as was her habit, she found herself making 2 columns: reasons to continue to Jackson as planned, and reasons to consider Preston's proposal. On one side, she listed her dreams of independence, the legacy of her uncle's land, her carefully laid plans for sheep raising and self-sufficiency. On the other, the undeniable attraction she felt toward Preston, the security and partnership he offered, the possibility of building something together rather than alone. Both paths had merit. Both involved risk. As she finally closed her journal without reaching a conclusion, Deanna realized that whatever choice she made the next day would irrevocably change the course of her life. Morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of warmth later in the day. Deanna dressed carefully in her riding skirt and a fresh shirtwaist, her hair braided and pinned up beneath a practical hat. She packed a few personal items in her reticule, including her journal and the deed to her uncle's property, talismans of sorts, as she faced this decision. Preston arrived precisely at 9, riding his own horse and leading a gentle-looking bay mare for Deanna. "Good morning," he greeted her, his smile warm though his eyes held a hint of uncertainty. "Ready for our adventure?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Deanna replied, accepting his help to mount the mare, who stood patiently despite being unfamiliar with her rider. They rode out of town at a leisurely pace, Preston pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. Deanna found herself relaxing in the saddle, enjoying the beautiful day and Preston's companionship, despite the weight of the choice that awaited her. Thompson Creek proved to be as lovely as Preston had promised, a clear stream flowing through a small valley, with willows lining the banks and wildflowers dotting the grassy meadow beyond. They dismounted in a shady spot, and Preston spread a blanket he had brought in his saddlebags, then produced a simple picnic packed by Mrs. Thornton. As they ate cold chicken and biscuits, the conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from childhood memories to future hopes. Preston spoke of his dreams for the diamond, not just cattle raising, but perhaps orchards like Deanna had mentioned, and improvements to the ranch house to make it a true home. "It was built for function rather than comfort," he explained, "but I've always envisioned something more welcoming. Wide porches for summer evenings, proper glass windows instead of oiled paper, maybe even one of those cast iron stoves that heat more efficiently than fireplaces." Deanna smiled at his enthusiasm. "You've thought about this a great deal." "More lately than ever before," Preston admitted, his eyes meeting hers meaningfully. After they had eaten, they walked along the creek, eventually finding a sun-warmed rock large enough for both to sit upon. The water bubbled over stones below them, creating a soothing backdrop to the conversation that could no longer be postponed. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Deanna began, watching the play of light on the water rather than meeting Preston's gaze. "About staying in Riverton, about us." Preston remained silent, giving her space to continue. "When I left Kansas, I was determined to rely on no one but myself. My parents' deaths, losing our farm, it all taught me how quickly security can vanish." Deanna tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "The idea of building something that was entirely my own, that couldn't be taken away, became everything to me." "I understand that," Preston said quietly. "Independence is precious, especially when you've experienced its loss." Deanna nodded, grateful for his perception. "But these past few days with you have reminded me of something else. My parents valued partnership. They faced everything together, the good years and the bad." She finally turned to look at him directly. "What you're offering, it's tempting, Preston. More tempting than I expected any offer to be." Hope flickered in his blue eyes. But I need to see my uncle's land," Deanna said firmly. "I need to know what I'd be giving up before I can decide what to accept." She took a deep breath. "So I've reached a compromise if you're willing." "I'm listening," Preston assured her. "I'll continue to Jackson as planned," Deanna proposed. "I'll inspect the property, perhaps even stay there for a time to determine its true potential. And then," she hesitated briefly, And then, if you're still interested, I'll return to Riverton and we can explore what might exist between us." Preston considered this, his expression thoughtful. "How long do you anticipate this would take?" "A month, perhaps 2, Deanna replied. "Long enough to experience the land in different conditions to make a fair assessment." "Winter comes early to the mountains," Preston warned. "If you wait too long, the passes can become dangerous, even impassable." "I'm aware of the risk," Deanna acknowledged. "But this is something I need to do, Preston. For myself, for my peace of mind. Can you understand that?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, gazing out over the creek. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I do understand, and I respect your need to honor your family's legacy to see this through." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "But I want to offer an alternative if you'll hear it." Deanna nodded, curious. "Let me accompany you to Jackson," Preston suggested. "I can help you assess the property, using what I know about the territory and its potential. We can determine together whether it's truly viable for the plans you've made." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "And regardless of that outcome, we'll have time to know each other better, away from the watchful eyes of Riverton." The proposal caught Deanna by surprise. "But your ranch, surely you can't leave it unattended." "My foreman, Jim Garrett, is more than capable of managing things for a few weeks," Preston assured her. "The major work of the season is complete, and I trust him implicitly. He's been with me since my father's time." Deanna considered the offer, seeing both its practical advantages and the deeper meaning behind it. Preston was willing to set aside his own responsibilities to support her dreams, to help her make an informed decision about her future, their possible future together. "You would do that? Travel all that way, spend weeks away from your ranch, just to help me decide?" Preston's expression softened. "Diana, in the few days I've known you, you've awakened feelings I thought I'd never experience. The ranch will always be there, but this chance to build something with you might not come again. I'm willing to risk a great deal for that possibility." His sincerity was unmistakable, and Diana felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This was not a man seeking to control her or diminish her independence, but one offering genuine partnership, much like what her parents had shared. "When could we leave?" she asked, her decision made. Joy lit Preston's features. "The wagon should be ready tomorrow." "We could depart the following morning if that suits you." Deanna nodded, a smile spreading across her face despite her attempt to remain composed. "I think that would be perfect." Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her. "Thank you for this chance, Deanna. I promise you won't regret it." They stayed by the creek for another hour, making plans for the journey and sharing more of their hopes for the future. The uncertainty that had weighed on Diana since their first conversation about their feelings had lifted, replaced by a quiet excitement. She was still pursuing her original goal, but no longer alone, and the difference felt significant. As they rode back to Riverton in the late afternoon, Deanna found herself studying Preston's profile, admiring the strength and kindness evident in his features. She had come west seeking independence, but might have found something equally valuable: a partner worthy of trust, a man who respected her dreams even as he shared his own. The news of their planned journey spread quickly through Riverton, with reactions ranging from Mrs. Thornton's delighted approval to the wry comments of the saloon regulars about Preston finally getting caught. Eliza Thornton helped Diana select additional supplies suitable for an extended stay in the mountains, while Daniel arranged for letters of introduction to the banker and prominent citizens in Jackson. By the time the wagon was ready, repaired even more sturdily than before, with a new wheel crafted from seasoned, Hickory Diana found herself embraced by Preston's community in a way that both surprised and touched her. These people cared for him and, by extension, were willing to care for her too. They departed at dawn 2 days later, the wagon loaded with supplies for the journey and their stay in Jackson. Preston rode alongside on his buckskin gelding, occasionally ranging ahead to scout the trail or falling back to check that nothing had worked loose in the wagon. Deanna handled the reins confidently, her spirits high despite the challenging journey ahead. The route to Jackson took them through diverse terrain, rolling prairie giving way to foothills, then steeper mountain passes as they approached the Tetons. They camped beneath star-filled skies, sharing stories around the campfire and growing closer with each passing day. Preston proved to be an excellent traveling companion, knowledgeable about the land, unfailingly patient when obstacles arose, and possessed of a dry humor that made even difficult stretches of the journey enjoyable. On their 5th night on the trail, as they sat beside their fire in a sheltered valley, Deanna found herself watching Preston as he cleaned his rifle, a task he performed each evening with meticulous care. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, his expression focused and serious. "My father would have liked you," she said suddenly. Preston looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "What makes you say that?" "He valued competence above almost everything else," Deanna explained, "and thoroughness. He used to say that how a person maintains their tools tells you everything about how they approach life." Preston smiled, returning to his task. "My father said something similar. Take care of your equipment, and it will take care of you when you need it most." He finished reassembling the rifle and set it aside. "I wish I could have met your parents, Deanna. They raised an extraordinary daughter." The compliment warmed her, and Deanna found herself sharing more memories of her parents, her father's passion for agricultural innovation, her mother's quiet strength during the hardest times. Preston listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. When she finally fell silent, Preston added more wood to the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night sky. "Family shapes us in ways we don't always recognize," he observed. "My father's determination, my mother's kindness, I see their influence in everything I do." He looked at Deanna across the flames. "Just as I see your parents' wisdom and courage in you." The conversation shifted to Preston's family, then his memories of coming west as a boy, the difficult early years as his father established their ranch, his mother's efforts to create a home in the wilderness. Deanna found herself drawing parallels between their experiences, noting how similarly they had been raised despite the geographic distance between Kansas and Wyoming. As the fire burned low and the night grew cooler, Preston moved to sit beside Deanna on the log she had chosen as a seat. The warmth of his shoulder against hers was comforting in the chilly mountain air. "9 days until we reach Jackson, if the weather holds," he remarked, gazing up at the clear sky. "Are you excited to see your land at last?" "Excited and nervous," Deanna admitted. "I've built so many dreams around this property. What if it's not what I imagined?" Preston's hand found hers in the darkness. "Then we'll adjust those dreams accordingly. The land is only a starting point, Deanna, not the entire story." The simplicity and wisdom of his statement struck her deeply. Throughout her journey west, Diana had fixated on her uncle's property as the solution to all her problems, the key to her independence. But Preston was right, it was merely a starting point, one of many possible beginnings. She turned her hand to interlace her fingers with his, a silent acknowledgement of his insight and the growing bond between them. They sat together beneath the vast Wyoming sky, the future stretching before them like the star-strewn heavens above, full of possibilities, some yet unknown but all bright with promise. The remaining days of their journey brought challenges, a sudden mountain thunderstorm that forced them to seek shelter in a narrow cave, a stretch of trail washed out by spring floods that required a lengthy detour, an encounter with a black bear that sent Preston reaching for his rifle before the creature ambled away, uninterested in their presence. Through each obstacle, their partnership strengthened, each contributing their skills and supporting the other without question. They reached the outskirts of Jackson on a clear autumn morning, the Teton Range rising majestically against the blue sky. The settlement was smaller than Riverton, with fewer permanent structures and more temporary dwellings indicating its relatively recent establishment. "Your uncle was truly a pioneer," Preston remarked as they drove down the main street, drawing curious glances from the locals. "This area was barely settled 20 years ago when he claimed his land." Deanna nodded, excitement building as they approached their destination. According to the deed and maps, her uncle's property lay 5 miles east of town, in a valley with good water and natural protection from the worst winter winds. After arranging lodging at the town's small hotel, 2 adjoining rooms with Preston insisting on propriety, despite their days together on the trail, they sought out the land office to confirm the property boundaries and ensure all was in order with Deanna's claim. The land agent, a grizzled man named Hobson, raised his eyebrows when Deanna presented her deed. "Marshall property. Haven't heard that name in years." He examined the document carefully. "Everything seems in order, though. Your uncle paid taxes on that land faithfully until his death, though he never developed it beyond a small cabin." "There's a cabin?" Deanna asked, surprised. Her uncle's lawyer had mentioned only the land itself. Hobson nodded. "Basic structure from what I recall. Marshall came out every few years to check on it, maintain his claim. Last visit must have been 5-6 years back." He peered at Deanna and Preston over his spectacles. "You folks planning to settle there?" Preston let Deanna answer, respecting that this was her decision to share. "I'm assessing the property's potential," she replied diplomatically. "Mr. Evans has been kind enough to assist me with the journey and evaluation." Hobson grunted noncommittally, but his expression softened slightly. "You'll want to stock up here before heading out there." Nothing but wilderness between town and that property. With the legal matters confirmed, Deanna and Preston spent the remainder of the day purchasing additional supplies and gathering information about the area from local residents. The town's general store owner proved particularly helpful, having delivered goods to Deanna's uncle during his occasional visits. Marcus Marshall was an interesting fellow, the merchant recalled as he assembled their order. Didn't say much, but when he spoke, folks listened. He seemed to see potential in that valley that others missed. He glanced at Deanna. "You favor him around the eyes, miss. Same determined look." The comparison pleased Deanna, creating a connection to the uncle she had never known. Did he ever mention why he kept the land undeveloped for so long? The storekeeper shrugged. "Said he was holding it for the future, for family that would appreciate it proper. Guess that would be you." The following morning they set out for Deanna's property, the wagon loaded with supplies sufficient for several weeks. The trail eastward from Jackson was rougher than the main roads they had traveled previously, winding through forests of pine and aspen beginning to turn golden with the approach of autumn. As they crested a final rise, the valley that held Deanna's inheritance came into view, and she gasped at its beauty. A clear stream meandered through a broad meadow, stands of aspen and pine providing natural windbreaks. The cabin mentioned by Hobson was visible near the eastern edge, a small but solidly built structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. "It's perfect," Deanna breathed, drinking in the sight. Better than I imagined. Preston pulled his horse alongside the wagon, his expression thoughtful as he surveyed the land. Good water source, natural grazing, decent timber for building. He nodded approvingly. Your uncle chose well, Deanna. This has real potential. They made their way down into the valley, following what remained of an old track that led to the cabin. Up close, the structure proved to be small but sturdy, built of local pine logs with a stone chimney and a small porch facing the morning sun. The roof appeared sound, though the door hung slightly askew on its leather hinges. Inside, the cabin was simple, one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a narrow bed frame and shelves built into the walls. Dust covered everything and small creatures had clearly made homes in the corners, but the basic structure remained solid. Your uncle built to last, Preston observed, testing a roof beam with an experienced hand. Good craftsmanship here. Deanna moved to the single window, wiping away dust to better see the view her land, stretching out before her, waiting to be developed as her uncle had envisioned. The sense of possibility was palpable, and she could understand why Marcus Marshall had held on to this property, despite never settling here permanently. They spent that first day making the cabin habitable, sweeping out dust and debris, airing the single mattress they had brought from town, arranging their supplies in a semblance of order. Preston constructed a lean-to beside the cabin for his own sleeping quarters, insisting that Deanna take the cabin itself despite her protests that such arrangements were unnecessary after their time on the trail. "We're not in the wilderness now," he explained as he worked on his shelter. "This is your home, or could be. It deserves proper respect." The next weeks fell into a productive rhythm. Mornings were spent exploring the property, assessing soil quality, water sources, and natural resources. Preston taught Deanna to recognize signs of deer trails and beaver dams, to identify which slopes would offer the best protection for sheep in winter, which areas would be suitable for gardens or orchards. Afternoons were devoted to improving the cabin and its surroundings, patching the roof where needed, rehanging the door, clearing a proper garden plot, and constructing a simple corral for livestock. They worked side by side, their partnership growing more natural with each passing day. In the evenings, they sat before the cabin's fireplace or outside beneath the stars, discussing what they had observed and planning potential developments. Diana's journal filled with notes and sketches, the sheep pens she envisioned on the northern slope, the garden plots near the stream, the orchard she hoped to establish in the sheltered southeastern corner of the valley. Preston listened to her plans with genuine interest, offering suggestions based on his ranching experience, but never dismissing her ideas or attempting to impose his own vision. Their discussions often continued late into the night, punctuated by comfortable silences, and occasionally by stories from their respective childhoods. 2 weeks into their stay, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple, Preston spoke of something that had clearly been on his mind. "This land has everything you hoped for, Deanna. I can see why your uncle treasured it." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You could build something wonderful here just as you planned." Deanna nodded, sensing there was more he wanted to say. But Preston smiled slightly at her perception. "But it's isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, town nearly 10. Winters here are harsh, with snow often blocking the trails for weeks at a time." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The independence you seek comes with significant challenges, especially for someone starting alone." "I'm aware of the difficulties," Deanna acknowledged. "But many women have faced similar challenges on the frontier. Usually with family or community nearby, Preston pointed out gently. I admire your courage, Deanna, more than I can express, but courage doesn't preclude accepting help when it's offered with respect for your autonomy. Deanna understood what he was approaching, the question of their future, the possibility that had been growing between them during their weeks together. Are you offering help, Preston? Or something more? He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers in the cooling evening air. Both, if you'll have them. I've come to care for you deeply, Deanna. These weeks together have confirmed what I suspected in Riverton, that you're the partner I've been waiting for without knowing it. Diana's heart quickened at his words, though they weren't entirely unexpected. The connection between them had strengthened day by day, built on shared work, mutual respect, and growing affection. I care for you too, Preston, she admitted softly. More than I thought possible in such a short time. Hope lit his features, though he remained cautious. Enough to consider a life together. Not just here, but perhaps combining our dreams. Deanna looked out over the valley, her uncle's legacy and her planned future. Then back at Preston, this unexpected gift the broken wagon wheel had brought into her life. What exactly are you proposing? Preston took a deep breath. Marriage, ultimately, if that's what you want, but first, a compromise. He gestured toward the land stretching before them. Keep this property. Develop it as you've planned, but as part of a larger vision that includes the Diamond E. We could divide our time between both places, spring and summer here with your sheep and gardens, fall and winter at the ranch when the mountain weather turns. The suggestion was unexpected but intriguing, a way to honor both their legacies while building something new together. You would be willing to leave your ranch for part of each year? With proper management, yes, Preston confirmed. Jim has proven he can handle things in my absence, and the railroad makes travel between regions more feasible than ever before. He smiled. Besides, I find I'm rather partial to this valley. I can see why your uncle cherished it. Diana considered the proposal, searching for flaws or hidden compromises that might later cause regret. But all she found was a genuine offer of partnership from a man who had demonstrated his respect for her independence at every turn. There would be practical matters to consider, she said thoughtfully. Legal arrangements for both properties, clear understandings about decision-making. Preston nodded, clearly having anticipated these concerns. Equal partnership in all things, Deanna. Your land remains yours. The Diamond E remains in my family's name, but we manage both together, make decisions together. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams, only to consider sharing them with me, as I would share mine with you. The sincerity in his voice and eyes was unmistakable, and Diana felt the last of her hesitation melting away. This wasn't the future she had envisioned when she set out from Kansas, but it was perhaps a better one: independence without isolation, partnership without submission. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. Yes to your compromise, to building something together. Joy transformed Preston's features, and he raised her hand to his lips. You've made me the happiest of men, Deanna Marshall. Then, with uncharacteristic uncertainty, he added, May I kiss you? I've wanted to since that day by the river. Deanna nodded, her heart racing as Preston moved closer on the porch bench. His hand came up to gently cup her cheek, and then his lips were on hers, warm, tender, conveying months of longing in a single touch. Deanna responded instinctively, her hands finding his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Preston kept his arm around Deanna's shoulders, her head finding a natural resting place against him as they gazed out over what would now be their shared future. "When shall we marry?" Preston asked after a comfortable silence. "Spring would be beautiful here, with wildflowers in the meadow." Deanna considered this. Spring would be practical too, time enough to make proper arrangements to integrate our plans for both properties. She glanced up at him with a smile, and to get to know each other better beyond our work together. Preston's eyes crinkled with amusement. "A reasonable precaution, though I feel I know you better after these weeks than many couples do after years of formal courtship." His expression grew more serious. "But I'm content to wait as long as you wish, Deanna. This decision will shape the rest of our lives." In the weeks that followed, they continued their assessment of the property while making plans for their future. Preston rode into Jackson to send telegrams to his foreman and to Eliza Thornton, sharing their news and arranging for the care of both properties during their absence. Together, they drafted a document outlining their intended partnership, equal responsibility for both properties, shared decision-making in all significant matters, provisions for children who might someday inherit these combined legacies. Preston insisted on having the agreement formalized by lawyers in both Jackson and Riverton, wanting Deanna to feel secure in the arrangement. As autumn progressed, and the first snows dusted the higher elevations, they reluctantly prepared to leave the valley. The cabin had been fully repaired and secured against winter damage, the garden plot prepared for spring planting, and detailed plans drawn for the development of sheep pens and other necessary structures. On their final evening, as they packed the last of their belongings into the wagon for an early departure the next day, Deanna stood on the porch watching the sunset light the valley one last time before winter closed it in. Preston joined her, his arm sliding comfortably around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly, noting her pensive expression. Deanna shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "Not at all, just saying goodbye until spring." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with anticipation rather than regret. "I'm looking forward to seeing the Diamond E, to starting our life together." Preston's smile warmed her more than any fire could. "It will be even more of a home with you there, Deanna." He kissed her softly. "Though I admit, this valley has claimed a piece of my heart as well." "Your uncle chose wisely." "As did I," Deanna replied, her hand coming to rest against Preston's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. They left at dawn the next morning, the repaired wagon rolling smoothly down the trail toward Jackson and then onward to Riverton. Deanna sat beside Preston on the driver's bench, her journal now filled with plans for their shared future secure in her pocket. As they crested the rise that would take the valley from view, Deanna glanced back one last time at her inheritance, not just the land itself, but the opportunity it had created, the future it had helped shape. When she had set out from Kansas, she had sought independence above all else. What she had found instead was something her parents would have recognized and celebrated: a true partnership founded on mutual respect, shared dreams, and growing love. The wheel that had broken in the river had seemed like disaster at the time, but it had led her to Preston Evans, and a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine. As they continued their journey toward Riverton and the Diamond E, Deanna's hand found Preston's on the bench between them, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had discovered in each other not just a companion for the journey, but a partner for life. 5 years later, Deanna stood on the porch of the cabin, now expanded into a comfortable home, watching Preston return from checking on their flock of sheep with their 3-year-old son, Paul, perched proudly on the saddle before him. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the meadow, now divided into neat pastures and flourishing garden plots. As promised, They divided their year between the two properties, spring and summer in the mountain valley, where sheep raising and Diana's orchards thrived, fall and winter at the Diamond E, where cattle ranching remained the primary focus. Both ventures had prospered under their joint management, with Diana's practical innovations complementing Preston's ranching experience. Their wedding, held the following spring in Riverton with the Thorntons and other friends in attendance, had been followed by a joyous community celebration at the Diamond E. Mrs. Thornton had cried happy tears, declaring she had known from the moment she saw them together that they were destined for each other. Now, as Preston lifted their son down from the horse and the boy ran toward her, Diana reflected on how completely her life had transformed since that fateful day at the river crossing. The independence she had sought had not been sacrificed, but rather enhanced through partnership with a man who valued her strength and intelligence as much as her love. "Mama," Paul called, his dark hair so like his father's tousled by the wind. "We saw the new lambs. Papa says they're the strongest batch yet." Diana scooped up her son, balancing him on her hip despite her advancing pregnancy. Their second child would arrive by summer's end, another blessing in this life they had built together. Preston approached more slowly, his smile warming as he took in the sight of his wife and son. At 35, the years had only enhanced his handsome features, adding a touch of gray at his temples that Diana found distinguished. "He's right about the lambs," Preston confirmed, leaning in to kiss Diana's cheek. "Your crossbreeding experiment is paying off exactly as you predicted." Pride flashed in Diana's eyes. The Merino Rambuillet crosses had been her idea, based on agricultural journals and correspondence with sheep farmers in Montana. The resulting improvement in wool quality and hardiness had made their operation increasingly profitable. "We make a good team," she said, reaching for his hand with her free one. Preston's fingers entwined with hers, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "The best," he agreed, "in all things." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, their son chattering excitedly between them, Diana thought again of the broken wheel that had seemed such a disaster. That moment of crisis had opened the door to everything she now cherished, not the solitary independence she had originally sought, but something far richer. A life shared with a partner who respected her dreams and helped make them reality, even as she did the same for him. The wagon wheel that snapped in the river had led her not to limitation but to possibility, not to compromise but to expansion. And when Preston had jumped down and said, "Let me take it from here," he hadn't been taking over, but rather offering the first gesture in what would become a lifetime of mutual support, shared challenges, and abiding love.